Very good. Very good morning to everybody, and welcome to this waterfront webinar on digital consultation and engagement, the technologies and the techniques, and so on. My name is John Underwood, and it's my great pleasure to be your host this morning for this webinar. We have three great speakers who are joining us today, and in a moment I'm going to introduce them to you. I'm going to give each of them about 10 minutes to make their presentation, and then we'll open the webinar to questions from those of you who are joining us from locked down living rooms, studies, kitchens, bedrooms, all over the country. Our speakers today are Liz Dunn, a partner at the law firm of Burgess Salmon, Mike Saunders, the chief executive of the online engagement platform Commonplace, and James Sachon, technical director at the infrastructure firm of ACOM. Now, some of our speakers have slides or online demonstrations, and as if by magic, they should appear on your screens at the appropriate time. You can type in questions to the panel as we go. Please don't be shy. The more questions, the merrier. But we will attempt to take all of the questions after we've heard from the speakers. Now, we're all meeting online today for the very simple reason that Britain and indeed much of the rest of the world is locked down at home as we battle coronavirus. This is leading to some very rapid changes in family and social behaviours, and it's driving, of course, big business changes as well. And in the increasingly important field of stakeholder engagement and consultation, face-to-face meetings are, for the moment, virtually impossible. And developers and others are turning to online engagement as one way of keeping projects on track. So how does it work? What are the traps and pitfalls? What are the bonuses and advantages of online engagement? And what legal considerations do we need to be aware of as we move into online engagement and consultation? Let's move straight to our first speaker, who is Liz Dunn. Liz is a lawyer specializing in development and in particular infrastructure, energy and major redevelopment projects. Liz advises on nationally significant infrastructure projects, NSIPs, and planning obligations, judicial review and much more besides. Amongst her current projects is, of course, the Bradwell B new nuclear development. So, Liz, we're extremely pleased that you're able to join us this morning. And can I perhaps now hand over to you?
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be involved with this webinar and, like everybody else, to be working with new technologies and techniques to make sure that we're able to continue communicating and discussing important points with each other. Could you move the slide, please? So just in terms of who we are, John's already introduced us. We're specialist infrastructure lawyers, and I specialise in consenting of infrastructure projects as nationally significant infrastructure projects, developments of national significance, or as Town and Country Planning Act projects. We're currently, as John said, advising on the Bradwell B new nuclear power station, a number of offshore wind NSIPs. We're advising Highways England on its A38 Derby Junction scheme, which will shortly be piloting digital hearings, the first for PINs and for nationally significant infrastructure projects. And closer to home, we've just helped YTL, a Malaysian developer, to secure approval for its 17,000-seater arena project in Bristol. Slide, please. Could you move the slide?
Can you see the slides at your end?
I'm sorry, I'm struggling with them a bit at this end. Hang on.
So would you like to speak to perhaps to the overview slide?
Shall I I wonder if I can, sorry about this. Shall I speak? Yes, that would be That would be
I'll tell you what we'll do, Liz. We'll tell you
yeah.
when you tell us, and we'll tell you when we've moved on to the next slide, if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. So yes, the overview slide, what are we looking at? What am I going to be looking at? Very much a legal overview, looking at some of the requirements that are causing difficulties in the current time, both pre-application and post-acceptance for applications, the impacts this can have on projects, and some of the innovative solutions that we're seeing being used. Next slide. It's important with any consultation or engagement really to understand why you're doing it. I know this sounds incredibly obvious, but you'd be surprised at how many projects I think don't really think about this when they set up and start engagement. Is it going to be a one-off event or part of a series? Are you consulting or engaging to introduce a scheme to the public or to secure feedback on something like options or alternatives? The nature of that consultation is likely to be very influential in determining the best or most suitable approach to consultation. And again, it goes without saying really, but if you are consulting or engaging to fulfill a legal requirement, there's likely to be less flexibility about how you do that than for non-statutory or informal consultation. There are clear and very prescriptive statutory requirements for pre-application for nationally significant infrastructure projects, which many of you will be aware of, developments of national significance in Wales, and for certain Town and Country Planning Act projects, which must be adhered to. But until very recently, the Scottish requirements for Town and Country Planning applications were actually the only ones that prescribed a need for something as detailed as an exhibition, something that in the current circumstances there are clearly going to be major challenges meeting. So when you're looking at how to undertake consultation and engagement in the current climate, it's critical to understand the legal framework, to understand how much flexibility there is and what risk there is if you can't comply with any of those legal requirements. On to the next slide, please. I think it's right to say that for pre-application infrastructure projects under most consenting regimes, there is a degree of flexibility as to how certain of the requirements are met, and therefore some discretion for determining bodies as to whether they have been met by a particular project. In any consultation, there are also a number of general principles that are going to apply, the so-called gunning principles. They are that the consultation must be taking place at a time when the proposal is not fixed, that there's sufficient time or the sufficient information included in the consultation for the public to understand what is proposed, and that there's adequate time for responses, and that the product of the consultation is taken into account. It's not a particularly high bar in terms of meeting that with consultation and engagement, especially for development projects, which have now become quite sophisticated in terms of the engagement they carry out. I've also added there the point around illegitimate expectation, and I think this is likely to be one of the biggest areas of focus for both consultation and engagement that's taking place under the current restrictions. Is there a legitimate expectation, either created by the project itself or by previous consultation amongst the public, that they will be consulted in a certain way and at a certain time? And are you going to be able to fulfill that with any amended approach or activities? Putting it another way, are you going to be able to do what you said you'd do? For nationally significant infrastructure project schemes, the Statement of Community Consultation is a required document, drafted in conjunction with feedback from the relevant local authorities and published. And projects partway through consultation are going to have to look very, very carefully at their Statement of Community Consultation to determine whether they can carry on doing the consultation they planned using different techniques, or whether actually their Statement of Community Consultation is so prescriptive, you'd hope not, that you'd actually have to agree and publish an amended SOC to allow for those different approaches. Can we go to the next slide, please? Looking at post-submission, in terms of the statutory requirements for notifications and consultation, these are generally more prescriptive in terms of things like site notices, newspaper advertisements, and putting documents on request. And it's this last one, I think, that's causing most issues in terms of the project that we're working on at the moment. Each organisation clearly needs to take its own view of what can be done in the current situation. But it is those points around putting documents on deposit, I think, and for people to be able to have the opportunity to go and view those documents that's really going to be most problematic. And this is a requirement for accepted nationally significant infrastructure projects and for schemes which are EIA development. Interestingly, Scotland has very recently amended its statutory requirements for putting documents, both pre-application exhibitions and for hard copies needing to be placed on deposit. So they are ahead of England and Wales at the moment in terms of doing this. And so far, I'm not aware that there's any proposals from MHCLG on this. I think they've been focusing on decision making and making sure that can happen under the current climate. I'm sure others are going to have much more to say on areas of where we're seeing what we're seeing happening. These are some of the things, slide, that we're seeing on the ground as projects have to grapple with the challenges of keeping projects moving. I think we're going to see quite a mix of the old and the new. So return to things like newsletters and mail shots and offers to provide soft or hard copies of documents on request so that you're actually being able to make that specific contact with people in their homes. Planned exhibitions, again, that is a challenge, and those are being.
I'm going to interrupt you for just one moment because I don't think you said change slide, and you've moved on to the next slide, as it were, and we haven't seen it yet.
Sorry, can you move on to the?
Yeah. Okay, we're now on to what is emerging. So you carry on with what is emerging, but if you could just tell us when to change slide at the end.
Thank you, I will. So a mix of the old and the new. As I said, return to things like newsletters and mail shots and offers to provide soft or hard copies of documents on request, really trying to get that engagement with people in their homes and to make sure that they've got copies of documents if they need them or want to look at them. I think it's going to be interesting to see, given that a number of the people who are normally you'd expect to be engaged with going to view documents on deposit tend to be those without computers and perhaps struggle with technology. So whether there'll be a large demand for hard copies of documents will be interesting, and whether promoters are prepared to pay to actually send those copies of documents. We're also seeing planned exhibitions being replaced with very interesting things like 20-minute sort of contact the expert slots, where you can book in and have 20 minutes with an expert on a particular topic, or webinars on particular topics people can dial into. I think these are very, very interesting and will give a particular flavour, I think, to consultation where you've been able to have that engagement. Again, I think there is a challenge around those for whom technology itself is a challenge, like it has been for me today. And extended time periods. That is, I think, something that's being done pretty much across the board to ensure that not only is there sort of longer time for the public to respond, but also for statutory bodies, a number of whom are having staff furloughed or having challenges in terms of people being able to keep up with their workload. So giving those bodies more time to respond. And what we're seeing as well is where there's a statutory obligation around timings, for example, for perhaps EIA scoping under the Nationally Significant Infrastructure Project regime, where PINS has a statutory period that it can accept responses from consultees, where developers are looking to actually do an informal consultation back to back with those to be able to extend that period. And I think finally, when you are looking at different techniques, the really important thing to think about is, do they meet those legal requirements? Do they meet your original objectives and those general principles? And especially that point, I'd stress again, in the current circumstances around legitimate expectation. What expectations have been set around the consultation that's going to be carried out, and can those be met with those new techniques? Thank you.
Liz, thank you very much indeed. Fascinating contribution, and I'm sure it will generate a number of questions from our participants, of which I see from the screen here that we've got over 80 people on the webinar now, so I'm sure there will be some questions. Thank you very much indeed for that contribution. Our next speaker is Mike Saunders, the Chief Executive of Commonplace. Commonplace is an online platform that facilitates conversations, engagement, analysis, and much more besides. And Mike has worked with a whole array of clients, including Highways England. He's worked on the HS2 project, and of course a whole array of councils, developers, and housing associations. Mike, thank you once again for being with us today. And if I may, I'm now going to hand over to you.
Pleasure, thank you, John. Rebecca, could you let me show my presentation? Thank you. Okay, hi everybody. It's great to be involved in this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think the opportunities are for digital tools in consultation and engagement. As John said, I'm CEO and co-founder of Commonplace, and I guess what we really try and focus on with our customers is connecting people to places, and doing that for the purpose of accelerating positive change in those cases. The vast majority of what we do is around planning applications, pre-applications primarily. So I thought, whilst I was thinking about this and about what I wanted to really say, that even in this extraordinary times, in the midst of this epidemic, where there is a spike of engagement in digital, I mean, we're really seeing this, that you know, we're getting lots of inquiries from people about digital platforms and what they can do. But I think it's really important, even in these kind of extraordinary times where there's a very different kind of need in the short term, to be clear about what the value of digital is. Where does digital actually add value? And the reason for that is these extraordinary times will pass, and I think if you're starting to do something different digitally, it's really important that you're clear about what the value is going forward. And when I boiled this down, so what the value can digital add, I think it's really around three areas which I'm going to talk about. People, it's about trust, and it's about insight that can be developed. So let's talk about people first. What do I mean by people? Well, I mean both the number of people who you can reach using digital channels, and I mean the diversity of people that you can reach through digital channels. So on Commonplace, we've had over 1 million people interacting, and that's just on, you know, a single Commonplace platform. So there's a multitude of other platforms out there. So if you add up those numbers, there's a huge number of people who can be reached. If you can reach those people, you can generate a huge amount of evidence, and you can also use the digital tools, particularly analytics tools, to make sense of that evidence without adding a huge amount of additional workload to your teams. So there's a kind of win-win that's possible, and it's about both the volume but also the quality of the evidence that you can gather. So how do you actually get to those people? Well, there's a number of things that you can do. The first is that you can use digital tools to make sure that what you're talking about and particularly what you're asking people to, members of the community, to talk about is easy and convenient. It's easy for them to access, and it's convenient. You know, if you use digital to put out a 40-question survey that takes half an hour to complete, then you probably shouldn't be surprised if you get a low response. But on the other hand, if you do something that people can engage with in a matter of seconds, and they can do it on their phone or any digital device that they have access to, then you're much likely to get a higher take-up. We are quite interested in the idea of social proof, and social proof's a construct really, but the idea is that it's kind of like walking down the street. By seeing other people who are also walking down the street, it affirms your perception of what's going on, and this works on digital, and it's essentially how social media it kind of works and has become so successful. that if you see other people using social media, your friends and your networks, then you're much more likely to use it. And this is a kind of...
Do forgive me, I'm going to interrupt you because we've just realised that the participants are just simply seeing a white screen rather than you speaking, because you haven't shared your screen properly. So forgive me interrupting you. Can you do that? I think that people will find it either more interesting to see you speaking or to properly see your screen, as it were.
Okay, I do apologize for that. Let me try again.
So I think what we're seeing at the moment is a white screen. Now that's better. Now, if you can somehow, if you can just get the slides up properly on that screen so that it's a slideshow.
I'm going to do, I think it was going into slideshow mode that seemed to confuse it. Let's just try once more. Is that working?
No, you're absolutely right. That's what's confusing it. Go back to your previous picture.
I'm going to do it like that.
Let's work with that. That's probably the easiest thing. Work with that. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
No problem. So what I was talking about was this idea of social proof, and the way that by providing evidence of other people interacting with the same thing, that you're actually underlining and reinforcing the notion that it's something that other people would want to do, and that's basically how social media works. So what you see up there are a couple of examples of our community heat map, which is one of the tools that we offer, and it basically gets people talking about a place, and it gets them talking about it in a very open way, so you can actually see how many other people are doing that whilst you're doing it, and you can see what they've said. This can be amplified also by social media. So we encourage sharing on social media, and I would really encourage you to think about how you use social media and not be too afraid of it, because if you're not using it, then the void that's created by you not being there will be used by other people. And paid advertising can also amplify the take-up. So we quite often use paid advertising in a very focused way. You can do it to target communities by postcode. You can do it to target different types of demographics, and it can get you a very large audience very quickly. And finally, the idea of joining up offline and online, which I know at the moment is difficult to imagine, but one of the key benefits we've found is actually being able to synthesize what's happening online and what's happening offline and making it all part of a kind of coherent whole. I just wanted to give you a quick example here. This is the project we did with Leeds City Council. It was a citywide conversation. It managed to get over 100,000 people involved, so there's the kind of evidence of scale. And it joined up, and this is something that I also wanted to raise, the idea of joining up conversations. So a lot of planning applications are isolated, one-off engagements as far as the public is concerned, but actually what they're interested in and what digital can really help with is joining up these conversations into something that makes sense as a coherent whole. And what you see across the top there is, on the right-hand side, a before and after view. This is a very simple technique that we use a lot. It allows you to slide between a picture on the left-hand side and an annotated CGI on the right-hand side. You can use an illustration if you want, but it brings the proposals to life in a way that can be extremely powerful. So the next area is trust, and I'm sure many of you have seen the research that Grosvenor did last year. Trust is a huge issue. It's very difficult to gain trust in these kind of conversations. But it's essential if you want to have a proper open-minded conversation, and indeed it saves a huge amount of time, and it can save all sorts of other issues if you can get it right. And ultimately the benefit of it is about bringing people from potentially a kind of knee-jerk position of combat to one that's much more about collaboration. How do you do it? Well, digital is really good at transparency and openness. It's something that is kind of built into the way that the internet was first conceived, and so you can very easily create a conversation that is and feels very open. This means that you can you can provide a kind of opportunity that feels meaningful as well as genuinely being meaningful, and you can very easily create a conversation which isn't just a one-off poll. It's about an evolving set of reactions and content, and that supports the idea of trust exceptionally well. And again, this idea of joining up conversations is one that I can't stress too much in terms of how creating a meaningful dialogue can work really well. The example I wanted to show for this one is in Waltham Forest. This was a borough-wide conversation, took place over almost 2.5 years. And what the borough decided that they need to do, because it was a very controversial scheme, and you can see in the top left-hand corner there an example of a small group of residents that mounted a very effective campaign against the programme. And so what the borough decided they needed to do was to have a very broad, inclusive conversation. They managed to get over 20,000 people responding via Commonplace. And a lot of the engagement was about an early conversation about the place and about establishing an evidence of need, so that the proposals could then be based or built on that evidence based. And ultimately what it managed to allow them to do was to deliver this, pretty controversial programme very quickly, and to deliver some exceptional benefits to the local borough, including air quality, which a study by King's College has shown will actually mean that people in the borough live longer in the future. And then finally, insight. So with all of this volume of people, with the quality of the interactions, and with the trust that you've gained over creating a conversation that people feel is meaningful and feel that their voice is going to be heard, you create some fantastic insight. And that is an evidence base that you can use for your planning applications. You can use it to inform better decisions, both in the design process, but also in other areas of the work that you're doing. And you can create a kind of a strategic as well as an operational payoff to that. And I think this example, which is with Lewisham Council in Catford, where Team Catford, which was set up as a venture between Filigree Communications and Lewisham Council, decided that they wanted to start a long evolving conversation about Catford Town Centre, which they decided to use Commonplace for. This took place over almost 2 years before any design work was done on the town, and created a foundation of need which fed into the design brief, but it also flagged some really interesting and useful kind of quick wins that the council managed to take up. And one of these was around the accessibility of Catford Station. So I think there was a kind of understanding that Catford Station needed to be improved in terms of accessibility, but there wasn't a detailed knowledge of what the problem was exactly. And from the Commonplace heat map and other online engagement, they were able to identify exactly what that was. They were able to fix it before any of the design work for the town centre regeneration was done. And then really importantly, they were able to shout about that back to the community. So one of the really important aspects of digital engagement is not only getting information in, but is telling people what's been done with that information and explaining to them what the next steps are going to be. So just to summarise, I think that 3 things that digital can do really well, and I would encourage everybody to try, is around getting to more people and different people and engaging them in a much more collaborative process. You can do that through open dialogue, which generates trust. And from all of that, you get exceptional insight that produces a shared understanding of needs. Just for 30 seconds, I wanted to share with you a couple of other sort of technological things that we're doing. The first is integrating some other platforms. So many of you may have come across ViewCity. We can now integrate ViewCity, which is an interactive 3D model of most of London and other cities, into the Commonplace platform, so you can bring to life some of the proposals and things that are happening. And secondly, Liz was talking about webinars and their role in the current crisis. We've launched a webinar package which integrates with Commonplace, which is proving very popular at the moment, as you can imagine. And we're also offering some free licenses to councils specifically for their COVID-19 response. So if they want to use a platform that does all of the things that we've been talking about, specifically to help manage their communications and feedback, there are free licenses available. If that's of interest, I'd be delighted to talk to you. Thanks very much, everybody.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mike. It's very good, very illuminating. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution. I'm going to go straight on now to our third speaker, who is James Sachon. James is the technical director at ACOM and closely involved in ACOM's stakeholder engagement services team. In recent months and years has been working on a number of schemes as varied as the major works currently being completed at London's Waterloo Station and the consultation on the A303 Stonehenge Development Consent Order, which happens to be a section of road that I drive down frequently. So something that's very close to my heart, James. Very good morning to you. And can I now hand over to you, James, to give us your presentation?
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. So today I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Hopefully that has worked. And
I think it has. We can see your screen, see it properly. So that's very good. Thanks, James.
So what I'm going to show today is a couple of tools that we use for our digital engagement, and some of them are used across the industry, and I know others are using them. And the first one is our virtual public consultation, which we started working on last year, and we were in the process of launching it, and then we entered the current situation. And for us, this is pertinent for now, but it's actually really important for engagement at any stage, and it's something that I think will continue to evolve and become a bigger part of how we engage and consult on schemes. And it's really outside of the current situation. The virtual public consultation or public exhibition is aimed at people who either can't come to the events or don't want to for a huge variety of reasons, from certain issues through to being busy in work and not being able to spare the time to go down to a village hall or community centre. And we work with our team and some clients to develop this tool, and crucially it enables people to see the same information that they would at a public consultation, albeit in sometimes a slightly nicer venue than a village hall. And you can access the boards like you would and zoom in and so on. But also crucially, we wanted to make sure it had that level of interactive engagement. And so for this function, it has a live chat function where you can, let's see if it works. You can open it for certain times of the day and say that the virtual consultation will be open from say 4 o'clock till 8 o'clock, and you can choose different people you might want to talk to when you log on. And you can have a live chat with those individuals. So here we go. Xavier is there to answer my question. So you can view the information. You can say, I want to talk to somebody about the transport issues, or I want to talk to someone about the ecology issues. And you've got somebody on hand at the back end who's a member of our team, member of the client team, who's the expert who can be there to answer your questions whilst you're viewing the information. And that's a really important piece. Is without that, much of this is just the information you would get on a traditional website, but it gives that intuitive feel to the room, so you can spin around and have a look at all the other different information that's available. And you can also ask questions, leave feedback, and engage in that way. So it's something that's been evolving. I know it's been used across the industry, and other infrastructure projects have been using it, which is really important. And it's something that obviously the current situation has led to us using it more and more. So we've started to roll it out with a number of clients, including Oxfordshire County Council. Well, Xavier's responded to me there already. And a number of other clients we're talking to. So we're also talking to Public Health England about rolling out on one of their projects. And we've talked to many of our other clients about it. And it's also got interest internationally. So I know, I think it's been used in America on a number of projects as well. I think crucially, and some of the points that were raised by Liz at the beginning, is this can't be, even in the current situation, this can't be the only way you engage. And so when we've been projects, we've been having conversations with local authorities about how do you use this in a planning application, pre-application consultation, or a DCO, and supplement, you know, for the people, or give the opportunity for people who can't log on digitally to engage. And that would be through, there's various options we're looking at, through sending out information via hard copy, and then if they require more information, sending that out, and having a hotline so we can answer questions. There's all sorts of different ways we're looking at that, but I think this is one tool of engagement that we're using. And I think really importantly is we're in a very challenging situation now, and when the lockdown measures ease and when the new normal becomes more prevalent, there will be people who won't want to come to a village hall or community centre for quite a long time, and things like this and other tools that Mike has talked about and other parts of the industry are looking at are ways that we're going to be able to engage and push projects forward. And that's something we're really focused on. That for us, this is something we're using now, but there's going to be other ways that we're going to have to engage with people in the next 12 months to 18 months when people probably won't want to come to those more traditional types of events. And I think it's something that we're rolling out across a range of sectors, and it's constantly changing, and I know it's been used by all sorts of different companies. The other tool I just want to show you is something that we've used before, and I'm just going to try and share the change from one screen to another, so bear with me a second. Let's see if this works. There we go. And this is a sound oralization that we've used on a number of projects, and often when you're delivering a consultation engagement, you're telling people there's going to be a particular highways projects, there's going to be a change of noise as a result of the activity or the new road, and people don't necessarily believe or really understand what you're explaining when you're talking about changes in decibel levels of noise. So working with our noise team, we've produced this digital package that is able to demonstrate the change in noise from the current situation to the new situation, or between two different options of having a physical barrier and not having a physical barrier. So this is one where we worked with Highways England on a project in the Midlands, and just demonstrating the change and the difference in noise, and it's a digital way of showing that to communities, and we've used it on a number of projects, and it really has demonstrated the impact in a way that is much more gives them more of the context, and people can actually really try and understand it rather than trying to grapple with the difference between noise, energy and actual change in physical sound. So I'll just play this. Hopefully the sound will work. If not, John, maybe let me know. So there's no sound on this first slide, and then it goes into two different options. And I think the important thing here is we overlay it with the digital image of what you would be seeing from that receptor point, which is where the noise has been calculated from. So actually the second one is with I think a 4-meter noise barrier in place. And so it's enabling the community to actually engage in a digital way, but give them the context to enable them, so when they're responding to the consultation or when they're asking questions, they can do that in a way that's informed by some form of actual real experience of what the difference in sound is. And we've used this on so many different projects, and it has led to communities asking questions they may not have normally asked, and in some instances withdrawing objections, which has been very helpful, and enabling schemes to push forward at maybe a quicker pace than they would normally. So
James, can you unshare your screen now, because all we're seeing is a black screen, as it were?
Yes. Oh, how do I? Oh, it's been done for me.
Okay, that's good. We're back with you.
That's everything from me. So yeah, that's everything for me. It's just a couple of tools that we're using. For us, I think we're quite lucky. We've got a great team of digital and visualization guys who can help take our ideas and make them into reality. But I think they're really, really important for now, but also as we move forward into the new normal, it's going to be even more pertinent, I think, to engage digitally on all types of projects. That's everything for me.
James, thank you very, very much indeed. And thank you to all of our speakers. It's now over to you folks. I'm trying to look at the numbers here. I think it's just over 80 people who are on this webinar at the moment. We'd love you to sort of join us and participate. It's now 10:45, so I think we've probably got about 40 minutes or so for questions, and I'm keen that we take as many questions as we can from as many people as possible. Just to remind you, all you need to do is type your question in the question box on the software box that you can see on your left-hand side, on the side of your screen. And my colleague, Rebecca Ives-Rose, will make sure the questions are forwarded to me, and I'll then ask the appropriate panel member or members to respond. Now, we've already got some questions here, so I'm going to go straight to the first one, if I may, and I'm going to throw the question open to all of our panel members. This is a question from Paul Bowen, who asks, does the panel have any views on how we can engage with older and younger people in the current context as particularly hard to reach groups? Can collaborative design be deployed online in a meaningful way at the moment? Let's try and split that, if we may, into two questions. Let's begin with the question about engaging older and younger people in the current context. And I wonder, Mike, if we might go to you first of all. Any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Paul, for your question. So yes, I mean, the short answer is that there are different ways and different kind of patterns of engagement from different age groups particularly. So we find that younger people engage extremely readily online in large numbers. You can access them readily via social media. We get about 70% of our respondents under the age of 45. That partly reflects the demographic of the fact that we're operating often in urban areas, and so there's a skew to younger age group anyway. But typically, if you were conducting face-to-face engagement, you wouldn't be accessing that age group at all. Or people in their 20s particularly. So yes, absolutely, for younger people at the moment, they're very, very accessible if you use the right tools and take the right approach. Older people, we find they have a different kind of characteristic for online engagement, and that looks like typically a lower take up than younger people in terms of just numbers of people participating. But actually, once older people understand the tools and start using them, they're very heavy users of them, and they provide very, very rich feedback. So some of the things that we've been experimenting with are actually in this kind of lockdown mode, trying to encourage younger people who are in the same household to help and work with the older people to get them online and get them taking part, because what the evidence is that once they've got over the barrier of actually feeling that they can do it, then they would become very kind of valuable participants in the process.
That's great, thank you very much indeed. James, what's your experience in this kind of context?
Hi there. I think it's an interesting one because we working with Highways England on a recent project, the A428, which we consulted on obviously last year, so prior to the current situation. But Highways England often are pushing the boundaries, and they worked with a company called Block Builders to build the scheme in Minecraft, which enabled us to enable the project to go out to local schools and engage virtually with younger audiences around the project and around development in general. And it really engaged a completely different audience that would normally get involved in a project. So after the consultation, we saw that there was a 10% increase in people under 40 engaging in what we were doing. And that wasn't the school children, the primary age children, it was their parents who actually, because their children were getting involved through the workshops in the schools, actually then took the time to engage in the consultation and the statutory consultation and response. So thinking about things like that and the benefits that brings to the projects, I think, are really important. And it also adds to your STEM activity as well. So you're not just encouraging more people to get involved in what you're doing, but you're also using it. And so the next step now is using it to inform the younger audiences about the importance of construction, design, and engineering, and opening their minds up to it as a potential future career, which is also for the industry as a whole is really, really important, as there's it's been a huge skill shortage over the recent years. I think I'd echo Mike's point on older audiences. It's, I think we often, homogenize groups and put them all in one category. And I know my parents are pretty terrible online, but my wife's parents are fantastic, and they're way ahead of us. And I think, we have to be careful not to just lump everybody in the same group because you're over a certain age, you don't want to engage. And I think it's about just having all those different options for people to engage online, whether that's through, virtual engagement, email, Facebook advertising, and digital advertising, and also more traditional methods like picking up a phone and talking to people, because there will be people who will just want to ring a hotline and talk to you for 20 minutes in the current situation, and we need to enable people to do it that way as well.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And Liz, any quick thoughts from you on this question of how we engage with older and younger people and the importance of so doing? Liz, I think you're.
I think that the hard to reach groups are a really key area. No, am I muted?
You don't know you're not.
Can you
we
hear
can
me?
hear you now. We can hear you now. That's fine. You far away.
Okay, fine. Okay. The hard to reach groups are a key area for lots of decision makers. So for the planning inspectorate for nationally significant infrastructure projects, and for local authorities often with their consultation requirements. So I think understanding those hard to reach groups in a particular area, working out what their challenges are, whether that is slow broadband, because that's going to be an issue if you're looking at doing things digitally, and how you overcome those things. Also thinking about ethnic minorities, those for whom English isn't the first language, and making sure that what we're doing in terms of digital is inclusive, and that you're demonstrating that inclusivity when you're then reporting it and confirming that you've been compliant with the various different techniques. And something that James said about the telephone, I think we forget about the telephone, but actually the telephone is a really, really good way for contact, and there are a lot of people who will prefer using the telephone than doing a face-to-face. So it's important about building in all those techniques, but it's about understanding the people you're trying to engage with and making sure that then you're doing something that's as effective as it can be.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Liz. And let me, I've got several questions in here now, and we'll certainly try and get to all of them. But let me just pick up that second question from Paul Bowen, which was, can collaborative design be deployed online in a meaningful kind of way? Any thoughts, Mike?
Yes, absolutely. It's a really, really good question. And I think that by using a suite of different types of digital approach, you can make collaborative design meaningful and appropriate. So, what we're very interested in the kind of inverted commas normal world is punctuating the engagement process with face-to-face, which might be more intense, workshopy type events, and then using digital sometimes as a kind of ripple out effect, so that you can play back to a broader set of people what's happened in those more intensive things, and then you can get feedback from the broader group that might feed into a next event. And I think that kind of sort of cadence of activity can work online as well. So I mean, James demonstrated his virtual exhibition, that using that along with these kind of broader outreach type activities could work really well. We're running virtual exhibitions as well, and we're using kind of similar webinar and instant chat tools for the smaller groups, and then getting bigger groups of people to feed into that and to kind of consume the more intensive workings of those collaborative groups. But I think one of the key things about the meaningful collaborative design is actually the time that you allow for it, and making sure that you have the opportunity to go back to the groups at different stages throughout the process, and to offer them meaningful input at the right moments. I mean, going back to the Gunning principles as a sort of first principles basis, but you can do that really well online. It just needs planning, and needs thinking about, and it needs using the right tools at the right moment.
Very good, thank you very much indeed. And James, just a quick thought from you, perhaps, on that sense of whether we can meaningfully use collaborative online techniques at the moment. You demonstrated one way, I think, with the town hall meetings, but any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think I mean Mike makes a really important point there about it's about planning and how you develop it. So we've done a couple on some clients, some of our rail clients, where we've had some collaborative sessions in the last few weeks, but it just takes a lot more planning than you would necessarily need for a more traditional event where you're in a workshop setting, and you need the individuals taking part to spend the time and do a lot more preparation. So they're doing some of the reading and preparation and formulating some thoughts beforehand, so they come to the sessions sort of fully armed with what they're requiring out of it. And also recognizing that whereas previously you may have been able to have a workshop over 3 or 4 hours with various breaks, expecting somebody to be online virtually for 3 or 4 hours without interruptions from small children or just needing a break to get away. Just recognizing that, and maybe there's a session we've got next week where we're breaking it up over a couple of days and having an hour a day to give people that sort of ability to reset and come back. So I think it's exactly what Mike said. It's about the planning and how you deliver it.
Yeah, sounds very, very sensible. And I've got one question here very specifically for you, James. It's from Anthony Jones, who says, could we ask James to explain how well his virtual village hall displays on mobile devices? Can you help us on that one?
Yeah, so they work on mobile devices, they work on iPads. Because what you see there is relatively low res, you don't need a huge bandwidth to be able to view it. And yeah, we've got a team who are testing it on all those kind of devices. And I think the other thing I didn't say is, it comes back to the accessibility point, is we're looking at how we can make it compatible with screen readers for people with visual impairments who, you know, it's important that they're able to hear what's actually written on the virtual exhibition. But yeah, absolutely, no, it does work across all devices.
Okay, that's great, thank you. I've got a question here from Stephen Morgan, who asks this. One of the key current issues is consulting with and involving those who cannot access digital resources. Now, given that there cannot be public meetings or even visits to council offices at the present time, you may not know who the individuals are who need hard copies. Does the panel have any suggestions on how we proceed with that kind of audience? But Liz, any thoughts from you?
So, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
I think what we're seeing is actually, as I said in my presentation, a return to the old, with that sort of with those trying to contact people who perhaps don't have the ability to connect, or would have actually relied on going to public exhibitions or going to view documents on deposit. We're seeing newsletters and particularly targeted letters to households within a particular agreed area, whether that's your kind of key tight community consultation zone or something broader, and actually offers to provide copies, hard copies of documents, either on memory stick or even in hard copy. I think as this continues, we'll be thinking more about actually what those documents are. It's a bit of a bugbear of mine and has been for many years, about actually what we produce for consultation and how we make it accessible and engaging. So I think if this situation continues and we're looking more at using going forward digital techniques, I think how the paper and the digital work together is going to be very interesting. And I actually think we're going to continue to see that resurgence of paper copies, so letters going to people's houses with addresses where you can write in and then ask for copies. And I think also you're then needing to see perhaps a corresponding increase in consultation periods to allow for that. These are the documents, here they are, receipt of them, and then coming back. So I think it has the potential to extend things a bit, but I quite like this mix of the old and the new, because I think what we have to get to is a situation where we're catering for as many people as we possibly can, and they are being given the tools they need to be able to engage.
It makes perfect sense. And I think, Mike, you were saying in your presentation something very similar, and that is that although we are currently using many more of these kind of online techniques, it really is a mix of both online and offline that's required. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the accessibility point, which the question from Stephen was about. There's also the point about, you know, the kind of richness of interaction, and I always say that the best form of engagement is sitting down with somebody and having a cup of tea. At the moment, that's very difficult, but you know, having a blend that works for the project is absolutely essential. Just on the point of kind of paper versions of the documents, two things I'd say. One is that a number of customers that we've worked with have moved from a kind of a blanket sending out of paper documents to a kind of digital first and then requesting paper documents, and that has worked extremely well. And you just need to make sure that it's very easy for people to request them, you know, phone line or whatever. And the second is that if you're going to use paper documents, and that's very, very often needed, including some kind of a feedback form, then you can design that so that all of the data that's being collected online and offline is the same. And in fact, we offer a service whereby our customers can create a paper form and then they can upload that to Commonplace afterwards, so that then all the analytics, the analysis, and you know, the charts and everything that comes out of it is all in one place, and you can use the dashboard and so on to separate out the stuff that's been responded to on paper from the stuff that's been responded to online. So I think, again, kind of thinking through how you're going to do it and how it all works as part of the process can deliver some really valuable outcomes.
That's very helpful. I've got a question here from Louise Portman from Highways England, which and Louise asks the following question: what is the panel's view of using local radio to contact the older and more vulnerable members of society who may be shielding and cannot see revised site notices or collect newspapers? Why don't I come to James first on this occasion? James, your views on that one?
Yes, no, I think it's an absolutely good point, and something that on projects we are advising at the moment as well, because it was Liz who made a comment that we're going back to more traditional methods, and I do think that, you know, radio has often been discounted because it has a relatively low reach, but in these, you know, extraordinary times, we need to be going above and beyond, and you know, trying every tool to engage with our audience, and local radio, whether it's commercial or BBC, is a vital way of doing that. So yeah, I think with all these things, whether it's your, you know, it's digital paid advertising or it's radio paid advertising, local newspaper paid advertising, which are, you know, are still being delivered to people. My nephew is a paper boy and he's having a great time. But I think, you know, it's recognizing what is that audience reach and ensuring that you are hitting all your desired audiences, whether it's the ones you've identified through your EQIA or whether it's just the general demographics in the community. So absolutely, yeah, I would agree with that.
Great, thank you very much indeed. And Liz, I'm rather assuming that you too would be sort of in favour of that kind of mix, including things like radio. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's about understanding where you're consulting and the types of medium that people use there. I think I remember for the Stonehenge A303 that Highways England did some radio advertising about the consultation that was coming up, and it's very effective. So I think absolutely, I think it's something that should be part of the mix. And it's quite interesting going back to being more creative perhaps around putting a fuller consultation experience together and looking at those things that are really relevant in particular areas.
And Mike, I rather imagine that local radio could fit in rather well with Commonplace and with your platform and so on. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, some of the most successful kind of consultations that Commonplace has ever been used for have included local radio campaigns. I think, you know, the full mix of local media that, as James and Liz said, is focusing on the audience that you're trying to reach. You know, being strategic about how you use those is absolutely essential. The one thing I'd say about radio is that whereas advertising a physical event on radio works really well, I think if you're advertising a call to action or a follow-up that's other than a physical event, you need to think quite carefully about what the information is you need to provide in order that people can then follow that up. I mean, it sounds obvious, but I think it needs to be really clear. It needs to be something that people can remember after they've heard the radio ad and then can do something with.
Good point. Thank you. Let me move on to another question, if I may. This is a question from Katie Sutton, and I'm going to go to Liz first on this one. Katie asks, are there any examples of legal challenge or challenging public inquiries where a project has not undertaken physical public events, i.e. no face-to-face engagement? And I'm assuming that what Katie means by that is literally none whatsoever, an engagement that will be totally online. Can you help us on that one, Liz?
Yep, happy to. I'm not aware of any places where that's being challenged at the moment, and clearly we're in sort of new circumstances in terms of people needing to be creative about the way that they're carrying on their consultation in respect of ongoing projects. Interestingly, the requirement for face-to-face and for actually to hold a public exhibition, as I said in my presentation, the only legal requirement there is for that is in Scotland, the Scottish project, and they've suspended that through some changes to their regulations to enable consultation to carry on over this period. So they've suspended the need for projects to go, for documents to go on deposit, and for, in terms of pre-application consultation, to be there to be an exhibition. If you look at things like nationally significant infrastructure projects, there's a lot of guidance from the Planning Inspectorate about how pre-application should be carried out. I mentioned the statement of community consultation. Developers are required to agree that, to say what they're going to be doing. I think as projects have come through that regime, we've all learned that, this is my one and only joke, but you make your sock as willy as you can at those early points, because actually you have to think this is going to sit with the project perhaps 2 years. There will be changes, not necessarily in this. I think this has been an unforeseen change, but there will be changes in how consultation needs to be carried out. And you want to make sure that your statement of community consultation can accommodate those changes, that you can be doing the best consultation that can be done. So in terms of nationally significant infrastructure projects, the test on consultation is around acceptance. And if you get through acceptance, then typically the Planning Inspectorate are determining that you've done what you needed to do in terms of those legal requirements. As I say, I think there are challenges around certain of the requirements that are still in place at the moment, particularly around putting documents into deposit locations and whether and how that's being done. And I know that there are lots of creative solutions being thought of. I think the question is going to be how the regulators see those in terms of being able to demonstrate that actually documents were available, although they weren't physically in deposit locations.
I think we're having a little bit of
the spirit of
trouble
any
with your
legislation or
line,
requirements has been met, as opposed to the physical necessity.
Okay, Liz, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. I've got about 3 or 4 more questions here, so let me dash through them if I may. There's one here specifically to James, which comes from Blanca Martin, and Blanca asks, James, have you estimated the time required and the average cost in terms of the kind of, perhaps in terms of the total percentage cost of a project to develop and implement a virtual engagement tool such as the one that's been developed by ACOM? Hello, James, can you hear me okay? Hello, James, can you hear me all right?
Hi, John. Sorry, James has had to go now, so he's not on the webinar at the moment.
In which case, apologies. Let me, if I may, just get back to the main screen. Forgive us, folks. One moment, and we'll be back with you properly if we can be. Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll go on to my next question, which is a question about thoughts on, well, actually, let me go to a sort of a technical question for Liz, if I may. Liz, we're asked a really quite serious technical question here. It comes from Stephen Morgan, and Stephen asks, what is the difference between a statement of community consultation and a statement of community involvement? I assume that the former relates to NSIPs, he asks. Are there any legal obstacles to amending these statements, given that they cannot at present be made available, e.g. at council offices? Can you help us on that one, Liz?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me okay? Yep, okay. So a statement of community consultation is, as Stephen said, a document that is required as part of the pre-application stage of a nationally significant infrastructure project or a DCO application. The statement of community consultation is something that is drafted by the promoter. It's then consulted the local authority, and it then needs to be published. So it's normally published on a developer's website and also in the local press. And I have to say, in terms of publication, we are still seeing things going into local press. So that seems to not be a particular challenge in terms of meeting that requirement. In terms of the ability to be able to change that, once it's been published, there is a legal requirement for the developer's consultation to be carried out in accordance with that statement of community consultation. And actually, the local authorities will comment on that compliance as part of the acceptance of a nationally significant infrastructure application. So if you need to change it, effectively, you need to go back to that discussion with the local authority, agree a revised SOC with any change that needs to be in there, and then have that published again and make it available on the website. So there needs to be if it does need to be changed, you have to go back and redo that part of the SOC and republish it, which will take time and resource, and could delay consultation or could delay project being submitted.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much indeed, Liz. Very helpful. We've lost James, unfortunately, but what I'm going to do now is I've only got a couple of questions left. So let me go to Mike on the first of these. And I think to some degree, Mike, we've already covered this, but let me throw it back to you one more time, if I may. Your thoughts on ensuring this question, sorry, by the way, comes from Katie Sutton. Your thoughts on ensuring inclusive, hard to reach engagement activities in the current environment? Difficult, but any final thoughts on that?
I mean, I think the other thing that hasn't been said yet is that one of the great benefits of collecting digitally or engaging people digitally as part of a more holistic process is that it's quite easy to see who you have engaged and who you haven't engaged in kind of more or less real time. So if you do have holes in the demographic that you've managed to reach, and that could be age-based, it could be any other kind of demographic characteristic based, or indeed geographic, then you at least know as you're going through the process, and you can try and work out what to do about it. And that might be, it might be targeting a particular group demographically digitally, or it might be actually deploying some other way of reaching a group who aren't online, and we've talked about a number of those different techniques. So I think having that information allows you as early as possible in the process to try and work out what to do about it.
Thank you very much indeed. And Liz, a thought on that final question from you?
I think I would just reiterate the points made previously. Hard to reach groups are incredibly important, and it's interesting. Mike's comments around actually the one of the values of digital is you can look quite quickly at what you've got and what you don't have, and where you're able to plug gaps. I think it's about planning broadly. I think it's about understanding who your hard to reach groups are, and often doing something that's quite bespoke for those groups. We haven't really mentioned those for whom English is not a first language, and clearly they are really important groups to be engaging with as part of this process. So it is, I think what we will be seeing over the next few months is a real push to do more to make sure that consultation and engagement is effective, and that it's meeting the objectives it's setting itself to do. And I hope what we see is actually that some of this continues post this period, so that actually we are still looking very creatively at how we do things and making sure we're engaging widely.
Okay, Liz, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to draw us towards a conclusion now, and really just ask one final question of both of you, perhaps beginning with you, Mike, which is effectively the question: is there any going back now? Now that we are doing more of this kind of engagement because we have to, do you have any kind of sense that we are going to go back to some sort of sense of old normal, or do you think we're now into a different world?
I mean, you know, all the talk is about the new normal. I think what that new normal looks like it's too early to say, and I think a lot of that will probably depend on how long this lockdown lasts for and how kind of entrenched new behaviours become. But I think there's something really, you know, it's an awful, terrible time that the nation's going through, and there's personal tragedies that are happening as a result of it. But I think there is an optimistic side to this, and I think the kind of recovery which is already being started to be talked about will, I think, be based on an optimism that is around the value that people have seen in the community around them. And I think in terms of engagement and consultation, that's a hugely valuable kind of asset, because I think people will have realized that the kind of strength and the value of their community is actually probably greater than they had realized before. And I think that will create a really interesting platform for perhaps different types of engagement and different types of consultation going forward. I certainly hope so. And I think, you know, that's something that we're really interested in discussing and talking about, because I think it is a very exciting opportunity.
Sorry, Liz, forgive me, I failed to unmute myself. I was going to throw over to you, Liz. Any final thoughts from your end? You know, is this the new normal? Is there any going back at all, or is this what we really have now?
I think it depends what we all want out of the end of this, doesn't it? We've shown each other there are different ways of doing things. We've shown each other we can care about each other in communities and value the services we have. We've shown each other we can all work from home very effectively. We've shown each other we can do consultation in different ways. If we want things to change, then they can and should change. I suspect there'll be a bit of going back, but I would hope that there has been some terrible things going on, but there's also been some very good things coming out of this, and I hope that we hold on to those things and actually look to be more effective in the way that we work, more effective in the way that we engage, and meaningfully engage with people about these infrastructure projects. I've been really pleased to see that actually a lot of projects have continued, and that there is a sense that actually the work that we're doing around infrastructure is absolutely critical, and it needs to continue, it needs to carry on. And I think nobody should be embarrassed about the fact that they've carried on working through this period. It's what we come out with at the other end, and as I say, I think that's down to us and what we want.
Very good, Liz. Thank you very, very much indeed. So, folks, we're coming towards the end of our time now, so I'm going to draw our discussions to a conclusion. Before I do, may I thank, first of all of our speakers for some very illuminating insights into the technologies, the techniques of digital engagement and consultation, what the future might look like, how the present might develop. But may I also thank all of you for coming on and joining us on this webinar, participants from literally up and down the country. We'll be circulating some more materials after this webinar, along with a link to watch a recording if you or any of your colleagues wish to do so. Thank you once again. Do stay safe for as long as you possibly can. From Waterfront and from me, good morning. Bye-bye.